LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the March 4th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for joining me and Chong, one of my two cats. Oh, Chong wants to get down. He wanted to get up here before. Thanks for joining me for the Monday Media Mix-Up. I'll be using the 11 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. As you can see from the video title, my topic today is Biden-Trump border visits. Republicans losing advantage on immigration. And the reason I can ask that question for my regular viewers, you may remember my January 29th Monday Media Mix-Up was titled, Will Trump Stop Best Border Security Bill Deal Republicans Could Ever Get? That was the Monday Media Mix-Up number 139. This is 144, so just 5 weeks later, we know the answer. The answer is yes, Trump did stop the most Republican border security bill, the best bill that Republicans could ever get. Even a bunch of Republicans in the Senate said it at the time, but he wanted the issue for the election. He thought it could hurt him if there was some solution or even a partial solution to the problem of all these asylum seekers and others coming across our border. And anyway, that is the main topic. And I have two political comedy clips. Both are sort of on the main topic. The first one is the first few jokes on Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live last Saturday, which were supposedly about the Biden and Trump border visits, but really I think were jokes about Trump, as you can see over in this clip.
President Biden visited the southern border on Thursday and was horrified to discover it is being swarmed by criminals and rapists. That's right. Both Biden and Trump coincidentally visited the border on the same day, which sounds like the setup for the weirdest rom-com of all time. My favorite part of the visit was when Trump, who looks good behind bars, by the way, finally came face-to-face with his sworn enemies, the migrants, and he had a pretty harsh message for them. Take a look.
They like Trump. Can you believe it?
No, I can't believe it. The migrants don't like you. They just walked 1,000 miles to get to the edge of this river, and they're probably thinking, is that weirdo in a Trump costume waving us into the country?
So yeah, those, even though those jokes were ostensibly about the Biden-Trump border visits, a lot of them were at Trump's expense, also about his, him being found to be liable as a rapist. In the colloquial way people say rape, although it was really sexual abuse, and also the fact that he looks good behind bars, and maybe we'll all live to see that, or maybe not. I don't know. That was the topic I really wanted to cover. What I think when the Supreme Court decided to wait till April 22nd to hear arguments on whether Trump has absolute immunity from criminal prosecution as president, and that's going to push his January 6th trial well into the fall, and that was a big disappointment. And then, of course, the Supreme Court ruled today that Trump gets to be on the ballot in Colorado and other states that tried to kick him off under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment for being an insurrectionist. You may remember I've been saying all along that that wasn't going to work. And in fact, that turned out to be true. But anyway, I'm going off on a big tangent between my political comedy clips. The second political comedy clip, if you want to criticize Saturday Night Live for making the border jokes really about Trump mostly, well, their cold open was actually a big, it was really ridiculing Biden and his age, and especially the way everyone around him says, well, if you see him in person, behind closed doors, he's like really vigorous and can't keep up with him. And so Saturday Night Live made fun of that in their cold open of the program. And you can see, by the way, down under sources, I put a link to that Weekend Update sketch. And the cold open is also on the YouTube channel, but you can also see it on the NBC website, the entire episode down under sources. And so this started with a parody, Heidi Gardner doing a parody of Dana Bash on Inside Politics, and then they also had a parody of Alejandro Mayorkas, the Homeland Security Secretary. Now, I'm not going to show you a clip of that. I'm going to show you a clip of Dana Bash and Alejandro Mayorkas reacting to the Saturday Night Live parody of the two of them, which is a little odd, but I'll talk about it a little more after we watch it together over here.
Make a very hard turn right now to something a lot lighter than that, which is Saturday Night Live. I'm not sure if you saw when you were coming in this morning that you and I both got the SNL treatment last night. I'll play a clip.
I was with Joe Biden for the past weekend, and whew, he wiped me out.
Okay, so you feel he's up to the job?
Dana, I was just with him, and behind closed doors, he's a dynamo. Joe went into beast mode. He said, "We gotta tighten this border. Look how easy I can cross it." Then he parkoured up to the top of the border wall. He front flipped into the Rio Grande and came back up with a fish in his mouth.
Does that happen every day?
We all need a little comic relief now and then, and I thought George Clooney did a terrific job.
You know, obviously this is art, but they do this because they try to make a point that there is a discussion in the zeitgeist. There is a reason that they did a whole thing about Joe Biden's age. Do you want to have a real statement about it, about what you witnessed?
They should spend a bit of time with Joe Biden like I have done. Let me share something with you. I prepare a lot for meetings with him and engagements with him because he's remarkably detail-oriented, probing, and operationally focused.
Okay, but no fishing in the Rio Grande.
Not for me.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dana.
And I think it was Marcelo Hernandez is the name of the guy who, Marcelo Hernandez was the person doing the impression of Alejandro Mayorkas, and of course Heidi Gardner did Dana Bash. It's funny because Alejandro Mayorkas actually gave pretty much the same answer he gave before the parody, and was that a joke where he was saying Marcelo Hernandez, he was saying George Clooney did a good job, he was saying he was being played by George Clooney, was that a joke? I wasn't even sure, but wasn't really deep questioning from Dana Bash on how there's this party line that Biden is much more vigorous behind closed doors. I mean, he's fine. If you watch Biden, if you watch a lot of cable news and you watch full events like I do, Biden is so much better than Trump is. Trump is like sweating and sometimes incoherent. I almost played you a bunch of clips that they did on Morning Joe this morning from his speeches over the weekend, where there's this one place where he talks about how Russia and Saudi Arabia and he just like makes this weird groaning noise. It's I mean, once people are focused on Trump versus Biden, I think that Biden's going to win that battle, the mental competency battle between Trump and Biden, because if you really watch Biden all the time, I mean, he has a stutter. He does sometimes forget things. We all forget things, and more so as we get older. I've talked about this before. But anyway, I want to get on to my main topic, and now I'm going to show you the news summaries from shortest to longest. I'm sorry, from longest to shortest. I don't know why I said it backwards, but the two longest news summaries didn't really focus on the border immigration issue. It was like two long back and forths between the host and their like big pollster. So it starts off with the longest one being NBC News Meet the Press. Oh, by the way, down in the video description under media mentioned, I put short summaries of all 11 clips I'm going to show you. And so the NBC News Meet the Press news summary is Kristen Welker and Steve Kornnacki. They talk about the latest primary wins, the upcoming Super Tuesday races, and then this the New York Times Siena College poll results, and all of that takes I don't know, more time than it probably should. It's like over 7 minutes, this news summary, but I wanted to show it to you and then compare it to CBS News Face the Nation doing pretty much the same thing with Margaret Brennan and their pollster, Anthony Salvanto. So first, here's the NBC version that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch together over here.
Good Sunday morning. Super Tuesday is just 48 hours away. Is this Nikki Haley's last stand? And could this be the beginning of the general election? 15 states cast their votes in Republican nominating contests on Tuesday, the biggest primary day of the election season, with 865 delegates at stake, more than a third of the delegates in the Republican race. Now, Nikki Haley has lost 8 of the first 8 contests, struggling to match the 43% of the votes she won in New Hampshire. On Saturday, she lost caucuses in 3 more states. In Missouri, where former President Donald Trump won every county. Idaho, where Trump swept all 32 of the state's delegates. Trump also won the caucuses in Michigan after winning the primary there earlier this week.
If you look at the early states, he may have won them, yes, but he didn't get 40% of the vote. That's no small number.
We will win big on Super Tuesday, and this November, Virginia is going to tell crooked Joe Biden, you're fired, you're fired.
Haley is now dialing back expectations, telling me her goal on Tuesday is a, quote, competitive showing against Donald Trump, not necessarily to win states. Haley also weighing in on the Supreme Court's decision to hear arguments over Mr. Trump's claim that he's immune from criminal prosecution for allegedly trying to overturn the 2020 election.
I think you need to have the Supreme Court settle this. I don't think that a president should be immune from anything. I think that the president has to live under laws, too.
Should Trump's classified document case go to trial, do you think, before November?
I think all of the cases should be dealt with before November. We need to know what's going to happen before the presidency happens, because after that, should he become president, I don't think any of it's going to get heard.
Now, Trump weighed in on his legal battles at a rally in Virginia last night.
It's really impossible for me to get a fair trial in D.C., but that's okay. Don't worry. I don't know what's going to happen. I really don't. But it's all going to work out. We're going to come out so good. I'm more popular than I ever was because of these people.
Trump leads Biden by 5 points, 48 to 43% in a new poll of registered voters from the New York Times and Siena College. And there is an enthusiasm gap. Just 23% of Democratic primary voters say they will feel enthusiastic if Biden is the Democratic nominee as expected. That's half of the number of Republicans enthusiastic about Trump. Joining us for more on what this week's results in Michigan say about a potential Trump-Biden rematch and for a reality check on Haley's path on Super Tuesday is NBC News political correspondent Steve Kornnacki. Steve, break it all down for us.
Yeah, Kristen. Well, look, all eyes were on Michigan this week, obviously for the primary, but also because it will be a important, maybe the pivotal state in the general election if it is indeed a Trump-Biden rematch. Take a look here. We're giving you the states as they went in 2020 in the Trump-Biden election. If you reran them, remember, the states have different electoral count votes now. Some of them at least do. If you reran 2020, Biden would now start out with 303, Trump with 235. But how did Biden win in 2020? Remember, he flipped 5 states that Donald Trump had carried in 2016. That was Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona. So if Trump has a path back to the White House, it probably goes through those 5 states. Now, take a look in terms of underscoring the importance of Michigan and those 3 Midwest states. If you start with Georgia and Arizona, they were the 2 closest in 2020. So let's say, just for the sake of showing you this, that Trump is somehow able to flip those states. If he were to get Georgia, if he were to get Arizona, he would still be short of 270, and that would bring you to those Midwest states, and he would need to flip one of them in this scenario to get over 270. You could see if he were to get Michigan here, then he'd be over 270. So any Trump path back to the White House, he's going to have to win back at least one of those 3 Midwest states, and Michigan could actually end up being his best shot at it. You take a look at those primary results this week. As you mentioned, Trump here more than 40 points ahead of Nikki Haley. He does win every county in the state. You do see about a quarter of the vote there there not going to Trump. Take that with a grain of salt. Remember, open primary in Michigan. Democrats could vote. Republicans could vote in the Republican primary. Some evidence that there's a fair number of Democrats and independents who've been coming into these primaries just because they want to vote against Donald Trump. But if you looked inside these counties, you would see what we've known for a while now. Donald Trump's biggest vulnerability, his softest support is in the suburbs, particularly suburbs with high concentrations of white voters with college degrees, affluent white voters, a place like Oakland County, just north of Michigan, gigantic white-collar suburban county. Joe Biden had carried this by almost 15 points in 2020. Trump did win it in this primary, but he did worse there than he did statewide. That's the kind of county he may have some trouble in the fall. If Biden's going to win Michigan again, Biden's going to do it by driving up big numbers in places like Oakland County. Now, let's take a look at Joe Biden on the Democratic side. Again, he gets more than 80% of the vote in this week's primary, and a lot of attention on the uncommitted vote, about 100,000 votes here. You see, there was an effort from activists to make this a protest vote against Biden's handling of Israel and Hamas. But take this with a grain of salt, too. You see those 100,000 votes. Uncommitted is on the Michigan ballot every 4 years in these primaries. Even Barack Obama, 2012, unopposed, running for re-election. Uncommitted got over 10% of the vote against him. So in terms of the actual number of voters who are out there protesting Biden on the Israel-Hamas issue, who might stay home, might not vote for him in November, you're probably talking about a very, very small number. Of course, very, very close election. A very small number in that situation could matter here. So take a look here, though. This is all, as we say, assuming that Nikki Haley does not pull off the mother of all political miracles on Tuesday, because right now, here's the Republican race. You see the delegate count, Trump by a 10-to-1 margin, leading Nikki Haley. And you see what's going to come up Tuesday. Let me call those up. These are all the states and all the results we've had so far. But let's call up the big one, Super Tuesday here, and just take a look at this map. And I think you'll see the challenge Haley faces. Here's all the states. And, you start. It's the map and it's the rules. California, you would think, is a great state for Nikki Haley. Closed primary. Independents can't vote. Democrats can't vote. And it's winner take all. If Trump just gets 50% plus one, he gets all 169 delegates out of California. A lot of states that are like that. Alabama's essentially a winner take all. Arkansas is essentially a winner take all here. Texas is at the statewide level, essentially winner take all as well. They also give out votes by congressional district. But if you look at those districts, they really look friendly to Trump. The bottom line for Nikki Haley, when you look at this map, 40% is not going to cut it. Unless she's winning states, winning multiple states on Tuesday, she's going to get buried in a delegate avalanche, Kristen.
Just a fascinating breakdown. Steve Kornnacki, thank you so much for that. Well, I sat down with Ambassador Haley and began.
So, yeah, there's actually an interview with Nikki Haley on Meet the Press, where she says she won't necessarily endorse Trump. And by the way, under sources in the video description, you can see the entire March 3rd episode of Meet the Press uploaded to the NBC News channel on YouTube at a link I put down under sources. And so you can watch that whole Nikki Haley interview if you want to later. But I thought that the heavy focus on the polls and, spending 7 minutes on these primary results, that, it's pretty much a fait accompli at this point. I don't think anyone thinks that Trump and Biden aren't going to be the nominees, at least based on anyone's voting. Maybe one of them will, unexpectedly die. But other than that, I think we all have come to accept that they are going to be the nominees of their respective parties. So I thought like I said earlier, I thought the biggest story of the week was the Supreme Court, purposely delaying the Trump trial to a point where it's going to not really be finished by the time of the election. We'll see whether they're going to hear arguments on immunity in the January 6th trial on April 22nd, which is the last week that they hear oral arguments in this term. And they could give sometimes they give out the decision like July 1st. And the judge in that case, Tanya Chutkan, has said that she's going to give 88 days to prepare for trial, and that's been put on hold. And she's probably going to stick to that. And then the trial itself is going to take 2 or 3 months. So that's 5 or 6 months from July 1st is August, September, October, November, December. That's after the election, see? That is the most likely result. And what the Supreme Court did by waiting, first they wouldn't take the case before the DC Circuit Court of Appeals ruled, and then after that they waited 2 weeks to give their decision taking the case, which is not very quick. And then, for an election case, compared to what they did in Bush v. Gore, for example, or when churches couldn't open during COVID, but for finding out whether one of the leading candidates for president is going to be a convicted felon, no, they waited 2 weeks to say they're going to listen to arguments in an additional 7 weeks. And those are 9 key weeks that basically the Supreme Court already has put its partisan stamp on this election, even though I didn't expect a different result on whether Trump could be on the ballot under the 14th Amendment, as I said earlier. But anyway, I thought that was the biggest story of the week. I wish that had come up somewhere in these 7 minutes. CBS News Face the Nation pretty much did the same thing. It's a minute shorter, but they focused on just their own poll results, a CBS poll, rather than this New York Times Siena College poll, and then Steve Kornnacki did his thing about all the primary results. Anyway, I think I've talked long enough between the clips, and I'll show you the CBS News Face the Nation news summary over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We begin an important week in the 2024 election in which both President Biden and former President Trump are expected to win hundreds of delegates in Super Tuesday contests in more than 15 states. On Thursday, Mr. Biden will make his State of the Union address. Our CBS News poll out this morning shows the former president with a 4-point edge over the current president among likely voters nationwide. That is Trump's largest general election lead yet in our surveys this cycle. Joining us now is our Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto. Anthony, good to have you here.
Good morning.
So our polling has shown perceptions of the economy have been improving. So why isn't that helping Joe Biden?
Because it's the comparison that people are making between how they rate the economy today and what they remember it being during the Trump years. And it's the remembering that's the key word there. I specifically asked, how do you remember it? And 2/3 of voters say they remember it being good, which is also interesting because if you go back and look at the polling from that time, people did in fact rate it good in 2018, 2019, but then views of the economy cratered after the pandemic and the shutdowns, and it doesn't seem like they're remembering that part of it here. But that's the reality today, so it's that comparison that isn't holding up for the White House, number one. And then number two, you push that forward and ask, well, whose policies might make prices go down? And there's a lot of Republicans who think that prices will go down if Donald Trump gets elected. But what's troubling for Joe Biden is that you still get him associated with price increases, because a lot of people think that prices would continue to go up under his policies. That's why.
Memory is an interesting thing, isn't it? Anthony, the campaign is leaning heavily into issues of democracy, access to voting, even calling Donald Trump a threat to democracy itself. Why isn't that helping the Biden campaign?
Well, that's in the electorate's mind, but it's kind of priced in at this point in this sense. You get a majority of Americans that do think that the former president tried to stay in office past his constitutional term. The ones who think that his approach to that was illegal, which is just under half, are in fact voting for Joe Biden. But everybody else, the ones who think he was following constitutional processes or wasn't planning to stay, they're all ready to return Donald Trump to office. So that split in many ways kind of defines not just the race, but also where we are as a country right now. Maybe it moves a little bit as the trials go forward. Maybe if there's a conviction, certainly something to watch. But net, you get about an even split between Biden and Trump right now on who would do best at keeping democracy safe.
Democrats are putting reproductive rights front and center in this campaign, betting that it will drive turnout among voters across party lines who are just concerned about this issue. Is that a safe bet?
So there is a majority that feels that the overturn of Roe v. Wade was bad for the country. But what's interesting to me is this difference between then who blames Donald Trump for that, which is what the Biden campaign is trying to do. And that's a smaller number. But then coming even more immediately, the recent IVF ruling, we asked about that. And in fact, a large majority thinks that IVF should be legal. So again, this issue is going to stay top of mind and certainly is going to be a factor, I think.
And it's interesting because in Alabama, where that ruling happened 2 weeks ago, they are working very swiftly to protect it within the state legislature, and the governor are expected to look at some of those bills this week. So it shows how resonant that one issue is. But Anthony, this is going to be such a key week. We have Super Tuesday upon us. Has Biden been able to consolidate the base of his party, the people who are committed to coming out as Democrats?
Well, in many ways, no, not yet. And that's really important for two things. One is that a lot of the measures I've been describing here for Joe Biden are driven in part by the fact that Democrats are more critical of him and more critical of their president than Republicans are of Donald Trump. Now,
is that always the case?
Well, in some ways, that's kind of typical for Democrats, right? It's often a more transactional approach, often a little more criticism in there, whereas Republicans, and they've told us, they really value loyalty to Donald Trump. So some of that is baked in. But having said that, it comes out in the political story in right now, Democrats being less likely to say that they'll definitely vote. And a lot of Joe Biden's numbers are in part lower because of that. His campaign has work to do to drive up that motivation, and he's not doing as well as he did in 2020 with some key Democratic groups. I would add this, though, Margaret, and I think it's important. Joe Biden is trailing Donald Trump when we ask who has a vision for the country. And that speaks across party lines in many ways. And what I think is important there is that these are uncertain times in the minds of many voters. When people see uncertainty, even if they don't rate things right now as good, and they don't, they want a roadmap. They want to know where things are going. And that's a key gap that I'm going to watch over the next few months.
Fascinating. Anthony Salvanto, thank you for your insights.
Thank you.
And we turn now to America's immigration challenges. A U.S. official tells CBS News that Border Patrol agents recorded nearly 140,000 migrant apprehensions in between ports of entry in the month of February, an increase from 124,000 in January. That doesn't include asylum seekers or those who were processed at a port of entry. Joining us now is the Homeland Security Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas.
And I will have a clip of Margaret Brennan's interview with Alejandro Mayorkas, basically on my main topic, like who is to blame, Republicans or Biden? Does Biden have the power to solve the problem by executive order, or did Republicans mess up the ability to solve the border issue by refusing to pass this border security bill that would have, well, I'll talk about that more when I finish the news summaries, but that news summary was mostly poll results, and similarly to the NBC News Meet the Press news summary, it seems like a lot of time to spend on like a snapshot that won't necessarily make that much difference when we get to November, talking about, I mean, I guess it gives you some warning signs about what might be happening, but I thought that the focus on poll results as an issue was kind of overblown in both those news summaries, especially without mentioning what the Supreme Court did to the ability of the American people to find out whether Trump should be a convicted felon or not before the election, which seems like it's not going to happen. Well, it might happen in the New York hush money false business records case. That's supposed to actually start in 3 weeks. So, but a lot of people think that's not serious, but I think that may actually hurt Trump because the facts are really bad for Trump. But anyway, that's a whole other issue that I will probably be talking about in the next few weeks. But now I'm going to get to the two news summaries that actually focused more on the immigration issue. You saw Margaret Brennan did put the immigration issue in the tail end of the news summary there, right before she started questioning Alejandro Mayorkas. And I'm actually going to show the first and several questions that she asked right at the beginning. You'll see like the continuation of that CBS News Face the Nation clip when we get to clip 9. But we are now moving to clip 5, the Fox News Sunday news summary, where they actually had two reporters with the host Shannon Bream. First, Lucas Tomlinson giving like the political stuff, which is basically bad poll numbers for Biden and his upcoming State of the Union speech. And then they go to Griff Jenkins on the border and basically talking about how they're trying to blame each other. But it's kind of funny when I see on Fox News, they say Biden is playing the blame game on the border now that he's trying to blame Republicans for not passing this bipartisan border security bill. But Fox News has been playing the blame game like every single day. They don't do it on Fox News Sunday for some reason, but on even the straight news programs all day on Fox News, whenever they talk about the border, the chyron, the text at the bottom, it says Biden's border crisis. And now, God forbid, Biden saying it's not his border crisis. There are other reasons for the so-called border crisis. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch the Fox News Sunday news summary together over here.
Hello from Fox News in Washington. We've got brand new polls for you today, 2 days before millions of voters in 15 states and 1 U.S. territory go to the polls for Super Tuesday. President Biden's job approval number is an anemic 42%. A 58% majority of voters say they disapprove of his current job performance. In a head-to-head matchup with Donald Trump, Biden is 2 points down, but still within the margin of error, pointing to a very tight race. By contrast, Nikki Haley polls 8 points ahead of Biden, though she has yet to win one matchup in GOP primary races with Donald Trump. Will President Biden move these new numbers at all when he gives his State of the Union address before Congress and the nation Thursday night? In a moment, we will be joined by senators from both sides of the aisle who will be there. Republican Marco Rubio and Democrat Ben Cardin. We start, though, with live team coverage. Griff Jenkins standing by at the border in Texas as the migrant crisis dominates voters' concerns. Only the economy in our new polls goes higher. But we begin with Lucas Tomlinson at the White House. Hello, Lucas.
Good morning, Shannon. President Biden is spending the weekend in Camp David, likely putting his finishing touches on his State of the Union address, a speech where many lawmakers want to hear about his plans and executive actions he's mulling over to fix the southern border.
Why are you waiting to take executive action on the border?
Because we need more forces on the border. I don't have the authority to do that.
President Biden's approval rating for his handling of the border has reached an all-time low. But a new Fox News poll says it's not the top issue for voters. It's the economy, followed by immigration and abortion. A majority of voters say Biden has made America weaker. 36% say stronger, numbers that trail former President Donald Trump in 2020. Only a quarter of those polled say Biden's policies have helped their family. Nearly half say they have hurt. 45% say Trump's policies helped.
No excuses, because the truth is, aid flowing to Gaza is nowhere nearly enough.
The U.S. military conducted its first airdrop into Gaza when 3 U.S. Air Force cargo planes dropped 38,000 halal meals to Palestinians below. 2 days after over 100 died after a crowd swarmed arriving aid trucks. It's not clear how many were trampled or shot by Israeli forces. Many expect Biden to use his address to put more pressure on Congress to pass aid for Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan. The shortest State of the Union address by a modern president was Richard Nixon back in 1972, just 29 minutes. Former Reagan speechwriter and Wall Street Journal columnist Peggy Noonan says that's a goal Biden should aim for. Shannon?
I maybe think those days are over, Lucas. Thank you, though. Lucas Tomlinson from the White House. Let's turn now to Fox News correspondent Griff Jenkins live on the border in Mission, Texas. A lot of attention there, Griff.
That's right. Good morning, Shannon. And immigration remains one of the top issues among voters, according to brand new Fox polling. 8 in 10 Americans say they are concerned about what they see happening at the border and are frustrated over a lack of action. Familiar sights along the southern border. Smugglers apprehended in Eagle Pass, Texas, Saturday, attempting to transport migrants past authorities, while a group of more than 100 turned themselves in to agents in Brownsville, just hours before President Biden arrived Thursday. In the latest Fox polling, 41% of Americans consider the situation at the border to be an emergency, up 7% since December. This after dueling presidential visits in Texas, separated by 300 miles.
We need to act. It's time for the speakers and some of my Republican friends in Congress who are blocking this bill to show a little spine.
The United States is being overrun by the Biden migrant crime. It's a new form of vicious violation to our country.
The Biden administration receives a failing grade when it comes to improving border security, with less than a quarter of voters viewing their efforts as a success. As the challenges of the border show no major signs of slowing down, migrant surges are moving west from Texas to Arizona and California. Governor Gavin Newsom visiting his border in San Diego County to get a first-hand look. Meanwhile, the nation watched as slain University of Georgia student Laken Riley was laid to rest Friday, allegedly murdered by a Venezuelan man illegally present in the U.S., a scenario top border officials worry most about.
These are the types of tragedies that they keep us up at night, and this is why we need to have an immigration system that works.
And Shannon, Chief Owens also says he needs Congress to pass a real budget, and he cannot keep operating on short-term continuing resolutions. Shannon?
Which we are once again doing. Griff Jenkins reporting from the border. Griff, thank you so much. Joining us now, Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio.
I don't have a clip of Senator Marco Rubio. I have a different Republican, Byron Donalds, who got slightly cross-examined by Shannon Bream on Republicans rejecting the most, like the best border security bill they could ever have gotten because Donald Trump told them he wanted to have the issue on the election. That was definitely had a lot of bias in it, even though it didn't have that chyron that said Biden's border crisis. They made that pretty clear. That was their belief. And then they also spent a lot of time on the migrant crime wave, the new idea that Trump has come up with, even though immigrants commit crimes, even undocumented immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants, commit crimes at a lower rate than the native-born population. Because, of course, if you're an undocumented immigrant, you probably are extra careful from coming in contact with law enforcement or getting in trouble with the law because you don't have documentation and you could be deported and you're afraid of the police. That's actually what sanctuary city policies are about, but I'm going to get to that when I get to the Alejandro Mayorkas interview with Margaret Brennan in just a minute. That's clip 9, but I was just showing you clip 5. Was there something else I was going to say about? Well, they obviously didn't mention the Supreme Court case that I've been saying they should have mentioned in the previous news summaries. The other thing is, I saw, what was it? I think it was the NBC News Meet the Press news summary showed clips of things Trump said over the weekend, but not his like cognitive deficit moments. And I think all the media should be showing that a lot more often. But anyway, that was definitely partisan political bias from Fox News Sunday, as we've come to expect. The next news summary is shorter, but is actually also focused on the border issue. This is the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary. It's Jon Karl talking about Gaza aid, and, well, it has some other topics. They talk about the Gaza aid that was briefly mentioned in the Fox News Sunday news summary, the Super Tuesday coming up, but the presidential race is almost over. they talk about, they spend like a really interesting amount of time on the fact that states don't have senators from different parties anymore. I guess it's a comment on political polarization, and then they also talk about Biden versus Trump at the border in the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary. I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good morning. Welcome to This Week. As we come on the air this morning, the U.S. military is airdropping desperately needed food to the people of Gaza. Later in this program, we'll be joined here in the studio by Chef Jose Andres, who has just returned from the region and is doing everything in his power to get food to people who are now facing the very real threat of starvation. But we begin on the home front. Super Tuesday just 2 days away. 15 states and 1 U.S. territory set to vote. In a normal presidential campaign, this would be peak primary season, heavy competition and upsets in the making. Instead, it seems as if the battle is already over, with Biden and Trump racing to lock things up and setting up the rematch the overwhelming majority of Americans say they just don't want. But then again, the overwhelming majority of Americans have also consistently said they don't like partisan gridlock. They want the parties to work together to tackle America's problems. And yet our politics remain hopelessly divided. Consider the Senate. Only 5 states, that's 5 out of 50, now have a split delegation with a senator on each side of the aisle, the lowest number since senators first started being elected by popular vote more than a century ago. And after the November election, it's possible that every single state in the entire country, except 1, will be represented by 2 senators from the same party. As for Biden and Trump, despite the steady march to the primaries, there are general election warning signs for each candidate. For Trump, it comes from the 40% or so of Republican primary voters in the early states who backed another candidate. Although, truth be told, there's no real evidence in the polls to back up Nikki Haley's claim that Trump can't win in November. For Biden, the warning shot came this week in Michigan, where more than 100,000 Democrats voted uncommitted, a protest vote fueled by their anger over the president's handling of the war in Gaza, which has now taken more than 30,000 Palestinian lives in the nearly 150 days since the conflict began, according to the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry. Despite those warning signs, Biden and Trump have already turned to the general election, nowhere more clearly than on Thursday, when they both visited Texas at the same time, each blaming the other for not dealing with the influx of migrants at the southern border. And that's where we begin this morning with Senator Chris Murphy.
So yeah, and I'm going to show you a clip of Senator Chris Murphy in just a couple minutes after I show the final news summary. And I pretty much pre-criticized that ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary from Jon Karl. I mean, it did cover a bunch of important topics. Not the Supreme Court, though. I don't know why the Supreme Court didn't make it into that news summary. And finally, here's Dana Bash on CNN State of the Union, spending less than a minute doing a news summary I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch that final, shortest news summary finally together over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the State of our Union is watching the general election take shape. Donald Trump came closer to officially becoming the Republican presidential nominee Saturday with another sweep. And his campaign expects to be within striking distance of formally clinching that nomination in 2 days on Super Tuesday, while Democrats got heartburn this weekend over a new poll that shows Trump winning. President Biden tried to take on his vulnerabilities this week and flip the script on immigration, as America got a preview of the months to come when Biden and Trump both headed to the southern border to make their case about what many voters see as their top issue. Here with me now is Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Thank you.
And yeah, that was the final news summary, just a brief look at some of the issues. Not the Supreme Court, though, messing up the ability to find out whether Trump should be convicted of a felony before the election, most likely. That didn't make it into any of those news summaries, so That's my big gripe with the news summaries this week. And I think otherwise I've pretty much given my political commentary and media criticism on what the different networks did for the news summaries. But I already showed you the Alejandro Mayorkas clip from CNN State of the Union, where Dana Bash asked about both of them being parodied on Saturday Night Live. But I will have another Alejandro Mayorkas clip. And look, it's Cheech. I showed you Chong at the beginning of the show. Now we have Cheech making a brief appearance, saying hello to everyone at the end of the news summaries, saying those news summaries were extra long this week. We shouldn't spend so much time on the news summaries. Whatever. That's what Cheech thinks. You can tell me what you think in the comment section. But now I'm going to show you Senator Chris Murphy giving a good, the bipartisan border bill in the Senate that Trump killed that I was talking about back on my January 29th show. That is Trump going to kill the best border bill Republicans could ever get? And the answer is yes. Well, Chris Murphy was the Democrat. It was 3 senators who were negotiating that. Chris Murphy, Kirsten Sinema was the independent, and then James Lankford, this conservative from Oklahoma. They all put together this bill that gave like Republicans almost their entire wish list, other than, maybe like separating kids to punish their parents for misdemeanor violation of border crossing laws. That if you want to know more about that, read this book here, Separated. We'll tell you all about how the Trump administration did that. So Republicans didn't get like ripping kids from their parents in the bill, but they did get a lot of modifications to asylum law that made it harder for people to claim asylum. So they ratcheted down the compassion lower, that's for sure. Anyway, that is not really what Chris Murphy's talking about in this next clip, but I'm like going off on a rant about Trump immigration policy and how great it was. Well, it wasn't so great, and that's something that the next couple newsmakers will point out. But first, here's Chris Murphy talking to Jon Karl on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where he asks him about what kind of executive action Biden might be contemplating, why it took Biden so long to address the border issue, and also talks about sanctuary cities. And I promised earlier that I would say, why sanctuary cities are important. Here in California, we're an entire sanctuary state, and that doesn't mean that immigration laws don't apply in the state. It doesn't mean that ICE and other federal immigration authorities can still come into California, and they can still get warrants to keep people in jail. Well, anyway, I'm actually pre-criticizing the clip too much. I'll explain more why sanctuary cities are a good thing after Chris Murphy kind of explains it after the third follow-up question of the cross-examination by Jon Karl, which is pretty good for the so-called liberal media cross-examining a Democrat, and I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
We'll start with the trip to the border by Trump and Biden. With Congress deadlocked on the issue that you worked so hard on, we've heard that the president's considering executive action of some kind. Can you give us a sense of what is under consideration and what he may do?
Well, first, I was very glad to see the president go to the border. I think Democrats need to go on the offense on this question of controlling the border. The fact of the matter is we did achieve a bipartisan compromise that would give the president new powers to get the border under control, and Donald Trump killed it. Donald Trump and Republicans decided that they want the border to be chaotic because it helps them politically. And polls show that if Democrats just tell that story, if the president tells that story, Republicans' political advantage on the border is erased. Now, the reality is President Biden needs that legislation because it is just not true that he has the existing authority to issue executive actions that can get the border under control.
So we're not going to see it. I mean, because he did, as we understand it, when the National Governors Association was in town, he told the governors he was considering executive action. So there's nothing he's going to do except talk about the bill the Republicans blocked?
Listen, I can't tell you whether President Biden is going to move forward on executive action. What I can tell you is that the bipartisan bill had $20 billion of new resources. He can't conjure $20 billion with an executive order. That bill gave him the power to shut down the border in between the ports of entry. I don't think he can do that by executive action. So Republicans...
What about tightening the asylum laws, making it tougher to...
Those are statutes, right? The president can't modify those statutes with executive order. And Republicans know this. So Republicans blocked the bill because they knew only the legislation would be effective in controlling the border. They want the border to be out of control because it helps him politically. And they know the president has limits to what he can do through executive order.
But let me ask you, we're obviously 3 years in. I know you spent several months negotiating this. But why did it take so long for the president to address this crisis at the border in terms of the flow of migrants?
Well, I don't know that that's fair. In the first week that the president was in office, he sent to Congress a comprehensive immigration and border reform bill.
But wait a minute, that bill was to provide a path to citizenship for the 11 million undocumented citizens, residents here in the country. It was not a border security bill. It was an immigration bill.
No, it was also an asylum reform bill, right? And reforming the asylum system.
It didn't tighten the asylum rules the way yours did it?
It changes the calculus for people coming into the country. And the president instituted a very tough new regulation that does stop people at the border, does change the asylum calculation. It, as expected, was blocked by the courts because he needs legislative action. And Republicans have made it very clear that they have no interest in coming to the table on immigration and border reform. And frankly, had we had this conversation a year ago, the calculation would have been no different. Republicans have made it absolutely crystal clear. They want the border to be a mess. Donald Trump has told them so.
But you know that you've seen poll after poll after poll. I could cite the latest Quinnipiac poll. There's been poll after poll after poll showing an overwhelming majority of Americans disapprove of how President Biden has handled the border. And we've also seen the flow over the border dramatically increase under this president.
What we also know is that under Donald Trump's presidency, crossings at the border were at a 10-year high. And this is exactly why I think the president and Democrats should go on the offense, because the vast majority of the country believes that we should have robust legal immigration, but they want tighter control of the border. And right now, there's only one party that can deliver that. Only the Democrats support pathways to citizenship, support expanding legal pathways into the country, and a tough border law. Republicans use the issue of immigration to try to divide us from each other, and now are on the record opposing the toughest border reform bill, the toughest border security bill in decades.
We saw New York Mayor Adams call for drastic changes to New York City's sanctuary policies. As the whole sanctuary city movement, did it go too far? Are we seeing a rollback of that? Should there be a rollback of that?
Well, you know, we treat immigrants compassionately in Connecticut as well. And listen, I think that speaks to the best of this country. Ultimately, this solution has to be on the border and in the countries that people are fleeing. I don't think it's in the best interest of this country to push immigrants into the shadows once they are here. So to me, the focus has to be on the border.
Okay,
So, yeah, I pretty much pre-criticized that clip, but I want to talk a little bit more about so-called sanctuary cities, which is actually a label that right-wing people made up to make it sound like more was happening than is really happening. It's not, as I said before I showed the clip, it's not that federal immigration authorities can't come and hunt for illegal immigrants or undocumented aliens or whatever you want to call them. In California, which is so-called sanctuary state, and I'm someone who worked on lobbying my legislature to pass various levels of so-called sanctuary state laws. First, there was the Trust Act here in California, then the Truth Act, and then the California Values Act. And I lobbied my legislators on behalf of the ACLU on all those bills. And I also worked on implementing them here in my county because the sheriff in Sacramento County kept violating the laws. Well, the previous sheriff, he retired to run for Congress and lost, but we had a really bad sheriff in Sacramento County who kept violating our laws, which were not to stop federal authorities from coming into Sacramento or California to enforce immigration laws, but to stop local law enforcement from cooperating with them because we have a big immigrant population, including undocumented immigrants. And if you're like a local police person, like a Sacramento City police officer or Sacramento County Sheriff deputy, and a crime happens, you want people who are undocumented immigrants who are victims of crime or witnesses to crime, you want them to feel safe talking to local law enforcement without fear that they're going to be turned over to federal authorities. And so that's one issue with so-called cooperation between local police and federal immigration authorities. And then the second level is what immigration is a civil thing. It's not criminal. So if you're deportable, the ICE sends to like a local police department what's called an immigration detainer, which is not a warrant based on probable cause that allows a jail to hold someone. That, it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment to honor these immigration detainers, although that hasn't been resolved by the Supreme Court. And this Supreme Court, who knows what they'll do. They're going off on a big tangent on that, but which I'm not going to do. But the point is, you don't want local cops to be coordinating with federal immigration authorities in a way that make the immigrant community, and especially undocumented immigrants, afraid to talk to the cops when they're the victims of crime or they're witnesses to crime, because that makes all of us less safe. That's what so-called sanctuary city laws are all about, and it's not about stopping immigration from coming into the state and apprehending people who are supposed to be deported. And if they actually want a local police department or sheriff's office or whatever, the jail, to hold someone who's undocumented, all they have to do is get a judge to sign a warrant. Otherwise they're violating the Fourth Amendment, the U.S. Constitution. Oh, look, I have a Constitution right here. I'm not gonna do the whole thing about subscribing or being a Patreon supporter or donating through PayPal for $5 to get this ACLU Constitution and this hashtag LiberalViewer weatherproof vinyl sticker. Well, I just kind of did do it. If you, for $5, either on Patreon or PayPal with the U.S. shipping address, I'll send both those to you. And you can read the Fourth Amendment, and you'll see that jails can't hold people without a warrant signed by a judge. Just some piece of paper from ICE that called an immigration detainer, that's not enough. But anyway, I did go off on a big tangent about, because this is something I've worked on for many years. I mean, as a small grassroots activist in a large movement. I'm not saying I did it. I'm saying I was a small part of this big movement here in California to make our local law enforcement officers separate from federal immigration authorities, because it makes us all safer. And I think I've talked about that enough. And now I'm going to show you another, this is a Biden administration official, not a senator like Chris Murphy from Connecticut. This is Alejandro Mayorkas, also answering questions about possible executive authority to help solve the problem of all the immigrants at the border, asylum seekers. That's what you see in all the video that Fox News has been showing, that it's mostly people who are trying to turn themselves in to immigration authorities, but they can't get to a port of entry because they block them off, and you have a legal right to ask for asylum. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch Alejandro Mayorkas answering questions from Margaret Brennan on this issue over in this clip.
We know that immigration is a key issue for voters across the country, and according to our polling, by more than 5 to 1, voters believe President Biden's policies will lead more migrants to try crossing the border compared with President Trump's policies. Only 22% think your policies will decrease migrant crossings. President Biden himself has said the border hasn't been secure in 10 years. Is there anything he can do without Congress to act now?
Margaret, we as an administration have taken executive actions. Those executive actions are being litigated. We do need Congress to act. For more than 3 decades, our system has been broken. A bipartisan group of senators have put forth a real solution that would provide the Department of Homeland Security and other departments and agencies involved in the immigration system with resources that we need, as well as policy changes that will fix this system. We need Congress to act. That is the enduring solution.
But Congress won't act, as you saw. That proposal, which we covered extensively on this program, isn't moving forward in the Senate, and no future at this point in the House. And it has been reported that immigration and that ICE is drafting plans to release migrants and slashing capacity to hold detainees because that Senate bill and the funding that was in it failed.
That's inaccurate.
That's inaccurate. That was in the Washington Post, and that is not true.
That is inaccurate. And let me say,
will you have to reprogram funds?
We have reprogrammed funds in the past because we have not been adequately resourced. Again, emphasizing the importance of the legislation that would provide not only more personnel and more resources for immigration and customs enforcement, but 1,500 personnel for U.S. Customs and Border Protection, 4,300 asylum officers. This is vitally important. But in terms of enforcing our law with the resources we have, since May of last year, we have removed or returned more people than in any entire year since 2015. Over the last 3 years, we've removed, returned, or expelled more people than in the 4 years of the prior administration. We are doing more with less, but we need more, and we need the system fixed. President Biden said it very frankly and very powerfully from Brownsville, Texas, just a few days ago. We need Congress to have a spine, do its job, which is work for the American people, and rather than allow a problem to fester for political reasons, to actually deliver the solution that everyone agrees is needed.
Short of this massive change of heart in Congress and productivity, CBS is reporting that the president is considering executive action and invoking executive authority 212F, I believe it's called, to suspend the entry of foreigners when it's determined their arrival is not in the best interest of the country. If your agency is so strapped in terms of resources, could you implement that?
Margaret, we've taken executive actions. Former President Trump invoked 212F, a statutory provision, and that was enjoined by the courts. And so when administrative actions are taken, they are often litigated and they do not endure. The American people deserve and expect enduring solutions, and Congress needs to deliver on the American public's expectations.
Do I understand you saying there then that you would have reservations about trying to use this same authority that the Trump administration had tried to use?
No, that's not what I'm saying. We have an obligation to consider all options as we do day in and day out. But those options are not going to deliver what legislation would.
Right.
We cannot administratively provide nearly $20 billion to the Department of Homeland Security and the Departments of State and Justice to make our immigration system work better and to stop the ever-increasing immigration case court backlog that has been building year after year after year. We can't administratively give the resources that we need. We need Congress to appropriate.
Congress controls the purse strings. But I want to ask you about a criminal case that has become a political rallying point. You heard Donald Trump use this phrase, migrant crime. A 22-year-old nursing student, I know you've been following this, Laken Riley in the state of Georgia was murdered allegedly by an undocumented.
And I kept that playing because you got to see Margaret Brennan use the air quotes. I always do the corporate media, and she's doing migrant crime, but she didn't say Biden migrant crime wave. That's what Trump said. But she talked about what Trump said over the weekend, didn't show any of his huge brain farts or whatever you want to call what's happening in Trump's mind when he's making these speeches, when he claims that Obama is president, or he just can't finish a line that he's reading from his teleprompter, or anyway, the stuff I was talking about earlier. But I thought Alejandro Mayorkas did a good job of carrying the cross-examination from Margaret Brennan there, and a good job of explaining how Republicans refusing to fund the additional resources needed to process all these asylum seekers that on the orders of Donald Trump, because he wanted to have the issue for the election. I mean, that is basically what's happening. That's why I think maybe Republicans, they have a huge advantage on the immigration issue, but it's shrinking because of what you heard from Alejandro Mayorkas, from Chris Murphy, and then I'm going to give you a third spokesperson for the Democrats on the immigration issue. And I guess in a way, this kind of, I was looking at the live comments along the way, and oh, here it is. GWolf333 said Dems are terrible on messaging. And so I showed you Chris Murphy, I showed you Alejandro Mayorkas, and I don't know if this is going to refute what GWolf333, one of my loyal live stream viewers who I appreciate, but I'm just saying, you heard Chris Murphy, you heard Alejandro Mayorkas, now here's Debbie Dingell from Michigan, trying to be a good Democrat, messaging in a way that Republicans are going to lose some of their advantage on the immigration issue, which is what I'm questioning by my topic in this video. And this is only 90 seconds, but you can let me know what you think after we watch it together over here.
Let me talk to you about another major issue, the border. President Biden reportedly thinking about taking an executive action that would restrict migrants from seeking asylum during surges. He's obviously gotten some backlash from some advocates. Do you think that that is the right move? Would you support that type of an executive action?
You know what I want to see? I want to see the bipartisan bill that the Senate worked on for several months actually come forward. And I think when you've got a former president who's a candidate for president tell people not to support something because it would give a win to a Democrat, the American people need a win.
Understood. Congress did not move on that issue. But should the president take that executive action?
Needs to be looking at executive orders, but he needs more money that needs to go into Customs and Border Patrols. The Republicans have cut that. We need to appropriate more money for judges, for law enforcement officials, for technology that's going to detect fentanyl. And the Republicans won't give it. So do I think he should look at every possible executive action? Yes. But do I think Congress? Yes. Democrats and Republicans and Democrats need to put resources in it it and give the American people a win now, not wait till another election. This is a hard issue. We're elected to do tough jobs. It's been decades, nobody's gotten it done. It's time to get the job done together in the Congress.
All right, we will leave it on that very powerful message. Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, thank you.
See, even Kristen Welker on NBC News' Meet the Press says that Debbie Dingell's messaging there was powerful messaging. Like, Congress has to come together and solve the problem because, honestly, it can't really be solved by executive order, as you saw the previous two newsmakers argue. And that is this clip and the previous two are my evidence for my argument that Republicans have made a big mistake by not accepting a win on border security and passing this bill that would have done things that a lot of Democrats didn't even want, like making it harder for people to claim asylum, but also surging resources for getting rid of the backlog of asylum claims and all sorts of border security measures that they wanted and they wanted for years. And like I said earlier, the best bill that they ever could have gotten, and they said no because Trump said kill it, as you heard the previous guest talk about. And the message is so strong, it actually almost kind of made it into Fox News Sunday. Shannon Bream did like a really weak cross-examination of Republican member of the House of Representatives from Florida, Byron Donalds, who is a big Trump supporter. And she kind of like refuted a little bit of what he said in terms of, well, where he's talking about how, or she's asking about how Republicans killed this bipartisan Senate bill that would have given Republicans more border security measures than they ever could have gotten or ever will get, even if Trump gets elected. That's what multiple senators said. But then Trump said, I want the issue instead of the solution or the partial solution, however you look at it. And so there is no border security deal bipartisan. Well, there might be one. There's something happening in the House that might be like a weaker version, and we'll see how that works out. But anyway, Shannon Bream actually cross-examines Byron Donalds slightly about it and then corrects something he says that's wrong, but then like immediately like almost apologizes for it, like saying, well, one thing you said about the bipartisan border deal that Trump killed in the Senate isn't true, but other bad things are in that bill, so let's move on to a different topic. That's this final newsmaker clip, the weak cross-examination of a Republican by Shannon Bream on Fox News Sunday yesterday, that I'll talk about a little more after we watch it together over here.
So he is essentially, many people think, running the party. You've heard a number of accusations on the show, if you've been able to listen today, that he's the one who told you guys to kill a border deal. He's not the only one saying that, though. That accusation is coming from both sides of the aisle. Take a listen to both sides.
Donald Trump simply has said to the MAGAs on the House side, don't do it. Don't do anything. Keep it a political issue.
Congress should have gone in a room, strengthened it, and passed something out. But Donald Trump went and told the Republicans, don't pass anything until after the general election because it would hurt him.
Your response?
First of all, you can't listen to Nikki Haley. She's the opponent. By the way, she's losing big time. You can't listen to Mr. Meeks because the Democrats never want to solve the border issues. They're the ones that created it. Here's what happened. The House Republicans passed H.R. 2 over a year ago. Chuck Schumer did nothing with that bill. Never came up for a debate. The Senate never came to the House and said, you know what, let's work together in a bipartisan fashion based upon what the House has passed, and let's see where we can meet in the middle. You had Senate Republicans, Senate Democrats go into a smoke-filled fill rooms. They created a terrible deal. And when the elements of this deal started being leaked out early, the 5,000 entrants per day, the fact that Joe Biden will be able to have waiver authority over all the provisions, House Republicans started signaling very early, led by Speaker Johnson, that we did not support that deal. When it finally came out and everybody could read it, then everybody rejected it. Even Mitch McConnell voted against it. So it was a bad deal from the start. The Democrats are playing the worst kind of politics because Joe Biden is the one who broke our southern border. Those are his executive orders when he came into the White House. These are the 10 million people who've come in under his watch, and he refuses to lift a finger. Don't talk about bipartisanship when the Senate Democrats would never even talk to House Republicans about what are the solutions. Because if there is going to be a compromise to be found, it is a negotiation between Senate Democrats and House Republicans. Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden do not want to have that conversation.
Okay, and just to clarify, because it keeps the backers or the drafters of this, including James Lankford, who I know that you know and respect, said once you hit an average of 5,000 a day, which would happen in week one, then the entire border was closed, not that an additional 5,000 would be able to come. Of course, that went nowhere because I know there were other problems people had with the bill. I want to read you something at the Daily Beast this weekend talking about a book that is not kind to Trump supporters. They call them a threat to democracy and say this: in the popular imagination of many Americans, the typical MAGA supporter is a rural resident who hates black and brown people, loathes.
And then, as you might imagine, Shannon Bream uses a black Republican to supposedly refute the fact that many supporters of Donald Trump are motivated by racism. But if you want to see that whole rest of the interview, there are links under sources in the video description. I pretty much pre-criticized that clip. You saw there that Shannon Bream at least refuted the part of what Byron Donalds was saying, that the bipartisan border deal, she seemed like she was trying to do something to protect James Lankford, the really conservative senator from Oklahoma, who was one of the three negotiators of this bipartisan border deal that Donald Trump killed in a way that, as I've put in the topic of this video, may lose some of Republicans' advantage on the immigration issue, because now Democrats have a really serious talking point to say that, well, Republicans killed the best border deal they're ever going to get. There was no path to citizenship for people who are undocumented in the country. Here's Cheech again. You can see Cheech walked into the room. And I'm actually going to get to my bonus Cheech and Chong clip at the end. But anyway, I didn't think Shannon Bream's cross-examination was that great because, as I said before I showed the clip, she immediately cleaned it up by saying, oh, but there were other problems with the bill, even though the problem you mentioned as to why you were against it actually is false. But I guess that's the best kind of cross-examination you can expect from Fox News, because Fox News isn't really a news organization, as you can find out by, reading this book, The Loudest Voice in the Room by Gabriel Sherman. You'll find out Fox News was actually created as a propaganda outlet for the Republican Party by Roger Ailes when he was upset that Richard Nixon had to leave when he broke the law, and it kind of worked out because thanks to Fox News, Trump made it all the way through his first term with 2 impeachments but no convictions, didn't have to resign like Nixon. So mission accomplished, Fox News. Anyway, another tangent while I'm finishing the show, but I appreciate all of my live viewers who showed up to watch the clips with me and give your comments that I got to interact with. And of course, the recorded show viewers, you can let me know what you think. You might actually be watching the show on Super Tuesday, so you might have more insight into that Super Tuesday coverage or predictions from some of those news summaries than I do now on non-Super Monday. I guess I'm doing my show. If tomorrow's Super Tuesday, today must be non-Super Monday. I feel like it's kind of a non-Super Monday. But anyway, that's because I'm doing the show a little early. I said in the live comments earlier that the first Monday of the month, I'll be doing the live stream a little early because I have this ACLU meeting that I have to get to in 22 minutes. See, I finished like 20 minutes before I have to get to that online meeting. But also, I've shown you Cheech and Chong live during the show, but I also have a bonus Cheech and Chong that, my kittens, or they're actually about 6 months old now. So are they still kittens? I don't know. I call cats kittens for their whole lives. That's just one of my little affectations. But Cheech and Chong, the kittens, I have a bonus Cheech and Chong clip. Those are the names they had when we adopted them, and we kept them. And now I'm going to show you their Cheech and Chong trash basket battle to finish the show over here. I found that amusing. So we started with political comedy and we ended with kitten comedy, and I'll try to do that as much as I can for the next 11 months, is it? Or I guess 10 months now to get through. No, even, 10 months to get through January 20th, 2025, when I'm going to finish these Monday media mix-ups, and maybe go back to doing like irregular edited produced videos. But anyway, thank you all for joining me. I have 20 minutes to get ready for my ACLU meeting now, so I probably won't have a reason to upload some other kind of video during the week, so I'll be back next Monday and every Monday for all the way through January 2025, and I hope you'll keep joining me until then. I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.